And we've done starting a schema, starting an instance from a schema, and linking an instance to a schema. Now let's talk about reading a schema. For this, I'm going to go to a more in-depth schema, back to the prototype schema that corresponds to the instance that you were working with last time. And now we'll talk about the major thing that's going on in a schema, which is global elements and the tag hierarchy. So all of the global elements, when you close everything down, all of the global elements are listed in a long row here. The global elements are global because they have no parents. That's why they're all listed at the top level with nothing above them, because they have no parents. They're at the top level. That's what it means to be global. One of the features of being a global tag at the top level like that is that you can be included other places in the schema without having to redefine that tag. So let's look at this title tag. This title is a global element, and by being a global element, it means that I can reuse it at various places inside my schema. For example, here's one instance of the title tag. Notice it has this little arrow, that little icon, and that a little icon there says that I'm a global element, whereas this one has no icon, so it's not a global element. And if I scan down this list, I wouldn't see an author. So the idea of a global element is that it sits at the top of the hierarchy, and second, that it can be reused anywhere you want inside of your schema. So here I have another title, and here I have yet another title. 3 instances of title that all refer back to this one. They're all linked to that one. If I change the definition of title one time here, it'll change in all of these other places as well. That's the idea of a global element. We'll come back around to global elements when we talk about sharing again. There's one global element, that's the special global element, and you'll always find it in the files that we use in this class. You'll always find it at the top of the list, and that's the one that we intend to be the root or the document element of the XML files that we create from this schema. In fact, we could have a root element of any of these, but that's not going to be very useful to us. We want really to have the root element be prototype, and so by convention, it's not necessarily this way, but by convention, I'll always put the global element that we intend to be the root element at the top of all of the other ones, so that you know exactly which one should serve as the root element. Okay, so that's global elements. Now let's talk about the tag hierarchy. This little schematic diagram here is a view of who's the parents and who's the children, including attributes. Let's look at the elements, however, first. This says that the root element is prototype, and that prototype has 3 children: about, info type, and access structures. It tells me also that about has these children: title, author, image, introduction, and sources. We'll get more into the symbology later. At this point, I just want you to see and understand the idea that the hierarchy of tags, what's a parent and what's a child, is shown, and that's really the main thing that's being shown inside of the schema. The other thing to point out is the difference in look and feel between the attributes and the elements. When I said before that prototype has about, info type, and access structures children, I was actually avoiding these ones. These are also children of prototype. So how many direct children, first generation children, does prototype have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3 of them are elements, 2 of them are attributes. Okay, so the attributes, as far as the tag hierarchy goes, they are really just the same as elements. They're children of their parent, and they're shown that way. Notice there's a line directly going to these 2 attributes. However, to distinguish clearly attributes from elements in the authoring environment here, attributes are all grouped together and they're put in this little pink box, and you can close them up if you don't want to look at them. Okay, so that's attributes and elements, and the element and attribute hierarchy, and the idea of globals. The last thing for us to talk about is values. I have here all the names of the tags, but where are the values of the tags? For example, where is the title? This is the word title, but where do I actually type the title? You might be tempted to go in here and start to edit this and actually type a title in there, but of course that's not where you type the title. In fact, there's no place to type the title inside of the schema. The schema is simply for defining the tags. The values of the tags, the actual title, goes in the XML file that corresponds to the schema. So here I'll switch over to the XML file, and now I can see the title. Here's the title of about. Here's the title. Let me close some of these things up here. Here's the title of info type. Notice that's the actual title, and it uses the title tag. And then if I was to drill down into one of these items, we can see again, here's the 3rd use of the title. So the values always go in the instance, and the definition of the tags always goes in the schema. All right, so that concludes this. Very first overview of what's happening inside of schemas, and we'll go on from here, getting more and more explicit about all the different things that schemas can do.